Hello everyone. Today we are going to read section 1 of our third unit, A Laugh Riot. The name of this section is Henry, a Chameleon. Ruskin Bond is one of the most popular children's writers of today. He writes in a simple and delightful style. Read this amusing story of an unusual pet, a chameleon. This is the story of Henry, our pet chameleon. Chameleons are in a class by themselves and are no ordinary reptiles. They are easily distinguished from their nearest relatives, the lizards, by certain outstanding features. A chameleon's tongue is as long as its body. Its limbs are long and slender, and its fingers and toes resembles a parrot's claws. On its head may be any of several ornaments. Henry had a rigid crest that looked like a fireman's helmet. Henry's eyes were his most remarkable feature. They were not only beautiful, but his left eye was quite independent of his right. He could move one eye without disturbing the other. Each eyeball bulging out of his head wobbled side to side, backward and forward. This frenzied movement gave Henry a horrible squint, and one look into Henry's frightful gaze was often enough to scare people into believing that chameleons are dangerous and poisonous reptiles. One day, grandfather was visiting a friend when he came upon a noisy scene at the garden gate. Men were shouting, hurling stones, and brandishing sticks. The cause of the uproar was a chameleon that had been discovered sunning itself on a shrub. Someone claimed that the chameleon could poison people 20 feet away simply by spitting at them. The residents of the area had risen up in arms. Grandfather was just in time to save the chameleon from certain death. He brought the little reptile home. The chameleon was Henry, and that was how he came to live with us. When I first visited Henry, he would treat me with great caution, sitting perfectly still on his perch with his back to me. The eye nearer to me would move around like the beam of a searchlight until it had me well in focus. Then it would stop and the other eye would begin an independent survey of its own. For a long time, Henry trusted no one and responded to my friendliest gestures with grave suspicion. Tiring of his wary attitude, I would tickle him gently in the ribs with my finger. This always threw him into a great rage. He would blow himself up to an enormous size as his lungs filled up with air, while his color changed from green to red. He would sit up on his hind legs, swaying from side to side, hoping to overawe me. Opening his mouth very wide, he would let out an angry hiss. But his threatening display went no further. He did not bite. Henry was a harmless fellow. If I put my finger in his mouth, even during his wildest moments, he would simply wait for me to take it out again. I suppose he could bite. His rigid jaws carried a number of finely pointed teeth, but Henry seemed convinced that his teeth were there for the sole purpose of chewing food, not fingers. Henry was sometimes willing to take food from my hands. This he did very swiftly. His tongue performed like a boomerang and always came back to him with the food, usually an insect attached to it. Although Henry didn't cause any trouble in our house, he did create somewhat of a riot in the nursery down the road. It started out quite innocently. When the papayas in our orchard were ripe, grandmother sent a basketful to her friend Mrs. Ghosh, who was the principal of a nursery school. While the basket was set waiting, Henry went searching for beetles and slipped in among the papayas unnoticed. The gardener dutifully carried the basket to the school and left it in Mrs. Ghosh's office. When Mrs. Ghosh returned after making her rounds, she began examining and admiring the papayas, and out popped Henry. Mrs. Ghosh screamed. Henry squinted up to her, both eyes revolving furiously. Mrs. Ghosh screamed again. Henry's color changed from green to yellow to red. His mouth opened as though he too would like to scream. An assistant teacher rushed in, took one look at the chameleon, and joined in the shrieking. Henry was terrified. He fled from the office, running down the corridor and into one of the classrooms. There he climbed up on a desk while children ran in all directions, some to get away from Henry, some to catch him. Henry finally made his exit through a window and disappeared in the garden. Grandmother heard about the incident from Mrs. Ghosh but didn't mention that the chameleon was ours. It might have spoiled their friendship. Grandfather and I didn't think Henry would find his way back to us because the school was 3 blocks away. But a few days later, I found him sunning himself on the garden wall. Although he looked none the worse for his adventure, he never went abroad again. Henry spent the rest of his days in the garden where he kept the insect population well within bounds. So this was the reading of our lesson, Henry the Chameleon. If you have any doubt or query, you can ask me in the comment section below. Also, don't forget to check the description box for the links to other chapters. Thank you everyone.